Evening. Perfect. My name is Dave Powell. I am Wake Audubon's president, and I have some announcements this evening before we get started, as always. Okay, perfect. All right, so we do bird outings pretty much every weekend, sometimes both Saturday and Sunday. So the best way to find out about our bird outings is to go to find us on Meetup, or you can go to our website. We have a calendar which will direct you to Meetup. So we have upcoming outings at Horseshoe Farm, Hilltop Needlemore, Bass Lake, just to name a couple. And this weekend is the Great Backyard Bird Count. So we have quite a few different events going on. Larry Zoller is leading a Sweetheart Bird Walk along the American Tobacco Trail on Friday morning. And on Sunday morning, we have another walk at Harris Lake County Park. And then I think it's mostly coincidental, but on Sunday, we also have our 46th annual Woodcock Walk. And so if you are interested in attending that, you need to get in touch with John Connors. You can find his information on the events page on Meetup. There's also another woodcock event at Horseshoe Farm this Wednesday if you can't make our own Sunday event. And then let's see, coming up, we have a new monthly walk that we're doing at the North Carolina Museum of Art. It's the second Saturdays of the month, I believe. The next one is March 8th. And this is part of our Birding for All program. So it is wheelchair accessible and all paved surfaces, no stairs, and it'll start being a monthly walk. So keep your eye out for it. And then we have our field trip this month is related to our program. So we have an event at Walnut Creek and we'll be, I don't exactly know how to describe it. We'll be introduced to the trash trap there. You can tell us more about it. I biked past it just Sunday. And so anyway, wear your closed-toe shoes, wear clothes that can get muddy, bring waders or hip boots if you have them. And you can RSVP for that on our Meetup page. And then we're going to be adopting that trash trap in the month of May. So stay tuned for that. And we'll give you more information about the volunteer opportunities involved with that. Speaking of volunteer opportunities, we are an all volunteer run organization. And so we are always looking for help. People hear me say this every meeting. But we are looking for a variety of different leaders to help with our conservation committee. We need a volunteer coordinator. We always have things to do. So if you are interested in learning more about how to get involved in our committees or on our board or in another volunteer leadership role, get in touch with me either after the meeting or send me an email. There's no special experience or education needed. We can help you figure out what you're good at and how to plug you in. So we do have one particularly interesting opportunity coming up. This is Wake Audubon's 50th anniversary this year. And so we are putting together a committee to plan how we want to celebrate that anniversary. It'll probably be an event or a series of events in the fall. So if you like event planning or want to get involved in helping us figure out our 50th anniversary, talk to Anne. She's not in the room right now. Oh, here they are. Talk to these ladies about our 50th anniversary. All right, and then we also have a need for both leaders and volunteers to help us staff tabling events that we have coming up at different environmental festivals and fairs throughout the spring and the rest of the year. There's a couple coming up that I know about. There's the Cary Arbor Day on March 22nd, the Historic Oakwood Garden Club, their 75th anniversary in April, and an Earth Day celebration at the Raleigh City Farm on April 26th. Those are ones that we don't have leaders for yet, but we have other volunteer opportunities as well. Larry, I don't know if you want to add anything to this call for action. Larry helps organize all of this, so.
I'll be fairly brief, but what I have is an opportunity for everybody to help out. And it's a one and done. And what it is we go to a lot of environmental festivals and they're really fun. And what we do, like we just went to one of our favorites, Groundhog Day, where they pull a groundhog out in the middle of the day, which is a riot. But Wake Audubon will have a booth there. And what we did this time is we had a bird identification activity. They had a nature activity with skulls and scat, and then they could make an owl or a groundhog out of a pine cone using natural materials, except for the googly eyes. And they had a good time. And we had some really great volunteers, and we needed them all. But we could use more because we go to a lot of festivals, and not everybody's home every weekend. So what I have here is, if you'd like to be on the email list that says, we're going to go to Kids in Nature and we need 5 volunteers, you'll get that post and you can say, yeah, I can make that day. So sign up. And when you're really good at it, then we'll say, hey, how about if you lead one? But that's not this. This is just volunteering, okay? And the 3 that he mentioned, we don't have leaders for, and it's likely if we don't get a leader, and I'll send it out to a little leader group, we might not go to them, but we still go to a ton of festivals and they're a lot of fun. And Louise, you've done a lot of them. What was it like?
The busier we are, the faster the time goes.
Yeah.
It's very entertaining.
Yeah. And it's a way for us to have contact with all those people that we want to have join us. So I have 2 pens. One will just be loose, but if that one runs out of ink, here's another, because I know you're all going to want to sign up. Okay.
Thank you, Larry. And this is an excellent transition because we have 2 volunteer awards that we give out every year. Larry was one of our awardees last year. And so we're currently taking nominations for those volunteer awards. There are ways that we try and recognize the great work of our volunteers, folks that are engaged in conservation and environmental education or in community building. So if you have someone in mind, you can find more information about the nominations in our newsletter on our website. And you're going to want to get in touch with our Vice President, Eric, who isn't here tonight, but you can come and talk to me as well, of course. And now, okay, I'm almost done, I swear. So we have, if you see up here, some lights out signs. This is part of our campaign to remind people to turn off their lights overnight during the fall migration. And we are running low on signs. We have like maybe 20-ish or so left. So if you are interested in a sign, we're giving them out first come, first serve. So make sure that you grab one while they're still available. And Missy, who will be up here in a minute, can help you this evening to get one. Or email her at the Lights Out email handle that we just put in the chat. And then lastly, I'm going to give it to John. You have a couple announcements you wanted to make.
And a couple of things. I brought 3 older suet cake feeder things that are in the back. If you want one or you know somebody who wants one, they're just 3 in the back. I ended up with 8. So if you need more, I'll call more. I just thought I'd start with 3 and see how it goes. The other thing is we're going to be sending out over our social media feed a survey request that we received. They're using birds, but they're studying neuroscience and how people respond to semi-stressful situations. So I did it a couple days ago. It's kind of fun. If you want to do this survey, took me about 20 minutes. And they're they show bird photos, but they also show bird names on top, but it's not the bird in the photo. And you're supposed to say neither of those things. You're supposed to say, is it a small bird or a big bird? So you have three things going on, and they're trying to assess how people react to that. And of course, they want your age and where you're from, and because they tailor the birds to where you live, and the bird photos. So anyway, it's kind of fun because you got your hand. You have to pick one key or the other, small or large, and I got my fingers right over, and you're trying to go as fast as you can and not make a mistake. And so anyway, it's kind of fun. You can watch our social media. We'll post the survey, and if you want to take it. And they're looking for non-birders. So if you know people who are not really birders, because they need a whole spread of people. If you're going to say something about one group, you got to have other groups involved. So they're looking for a variety of people. And so anyway, it was fun.
It is a cool, their website's cool. They talk about other studies they've done. It's very simple website. It's called Birding Studies. So you can find it pretty easily. And then my last announcement is we do something here at Wake Audubon where if you are here for the first time and want to join Wake Audubon, we will cover the cost of your membership for your first year. And so if you're interested in that, come find me. And our membership is inclusive of membership in the National Audubon Society. So you get the magazine and all the fun benefits that come with being involved in the national organization as well. So with that, I'm going to have Missy introduce our speaker tonight.
What? Ooh, ooh. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'm excited that tonight we have Samantha Krop with us. She is the Neuse River waterkeeper with Sound Rivers. And Sound Rivers is a what do you want? Nonprofit. That was the word I was looking for. Nonprofit that monitors the health and well-being of the Neuse watershed. She comes from the Gulf Coast of Florida, where as a child, she explored the wetlands and all the creatures that lived around her. I did that too. I was in Charleston. Anyway, Sam has spent her professional life working at the intersection between education and environmental activism. Try not to get tied up. She has a master's in education and has taught high school, undergraduate, and graduate level classes in environmental justice. More kudos to you. Today, she works in defense of the Neuse River watershed and those who rely on it through the means of water sampling, public education, community organizing, and political activism. But before I bring her up here, we're going to watch a Sound River, and it was created as a 40th anniversary documentary that follows the grassroots organization's history from sitting around the kitchen table to where they are today, fighting court battles with the giants in industrial polluters. So we're going to start that now, and then she'll be able to come up and continue with her presentation. Okay. Where's my,
Hold on.
I can't find my thingy.
There we go. Okay, he's on this side. There we go.
Okay. Ooh, thank you. Yeah, there you go.
There.
Arrow. Okay.
If you pollute a body of water, there will be consequences. Question is, are you going to be able to accept those consequences?
I have known the joyfulness of spring, flowers that bloom so gay, green new leaves on the trees, the clean, fresh air. I've known the joyfulness of spring. And that's what you get in a good, healthy community.
It took Mother Nature about 2 million years to make the rivers of eastern North Carolina. And in that time, she built in beauty that is just beyond words.
And everyone went to that Tar River to catch fish. It was a way of survival.
These rivers are what has brought the wealth to eastern North Carolina.
You know, in eastern North Carolina and all over the world, you know, where there's water, there's life.
The consequences are dire if we don't protect our clean water. Our quality of life depends on clean water. Our economy depends on clean water.
I think it's not such a coincidence that the Neuse River Foundation and the North Carolina Coastal Federation and Pamlico Tar River Foundation all started about the same time. James Watt was giving away all the land that had been locked up in the parks and this, that, and the other. Everybody was alarmed by what was going on. Each year it seemed like there was less fish, less wildlife. Everything seemed to be in a decline. We didn't have really a goal except just to try to do something to make people aware that the river was going downhill. The issue that really got us started was as a big phosphate mine, they leased 10,000 acres of river bottom with the intent of being able to mine those 10,000 acres.
In 1989, I was commercially fishing with my son. We had thrown a cast net into the water and pulled up some fish, and they were all covered with sores. Even the crabs had holes in their shells, and the shrimp were showing sores, and we began to see those sores on their bodies as well. Each year it got worse until the fish kill of 1991, which was the most destructive that the river has ever experienced. We didn't know that all of those symptoms were connected to what was happening in the river. We didn't learn that until around 1993. And that's about the time I started as a riverkeeper on the Neuse River.
Dealing with the phosphate mine was an ongoing issue. We finally got Texas Gulf to put in a recycling system to cut down on the effluent coming off that mine. It cost them $30 million, and it cut down by 90% the waste stream coming into the river. The next thing was getting up the whole Pamlico Tar River watershed, a nutrient-sensitive designation. When you do that, certain things are prohibited from being dumped into the river. It took years and years and years to get that done, but we did get it done. And that was a great thing for the river. There was never a time when I felt hopeless. I was always feeling like we were doing the right thing and we were going to win.
I came home from the office and I grabbed a paper, and there on the front page was this story about the Neuse River Foundation was going to hire a riverkeeper. And I put an application together and applied and was fortunate enough to get the job. And I can tell you that for the next 7 years, it was the most exciting and wonderful thing I've done in my whole life. Well, the first thing that we did in the Neuse River Foundation was to go after the wastewater treatment plants. So we started upstream, and then we moved down to Goldsboro, and then here on the lower Neuse, we actually had about 11 pipes pulled out of the river. Not only that, but we got the state to put in nutrient limits for all of these wastewater treatment plants. So then we began to go after the hog industry, which was basically flying under the radar in the early 90s. We began taking pictures of the discharges of these hog facilities actually spraying their waste into rivers and streams and wetlands. The media started to pick up on it. They began to fly in the airplanes with us. And that's when things began to change for at least the disclosure of what this animal industry was doing in North Carolina. Sad part of all that is it's as bad today, in my opinion, as it was back then. Maybe a little more deterred, but all of those polluting cesspools and spray fields are still out there.
I understand why people might not engage because they think that their water is fine and it is protected and there are laws and there are agencies, but that's not the reality. If our laws and our state agencies worked, Riverkeepers wouldn't have jobs. There wouldn't be a need for us.
You know, Riverkeepers, we are the voice for the river, and we are the voice for the people of the river.
The river that you see behind me, the Neuse River, that river belongs to everyone.
People don't necessarily know what is always going on. They're not all consumed with this all the time like we are.
A riverkeeper, I like to say we wear many hats, you know, and every day is different. Some days I'm an advocate, some days I'm a scientist, some days I'm an educator.
Our job is to understand what impacts and what sources of pollution are having on our watersheds, and then to relay that information to the public.
We also do get involved in litigation, and we're not attorneys, but we're out building cases or identifying issues and bringing it to lawyers who know how to use the law to try to achieve clean water results.
The objective of a riverkeeper is to go out and find that damn polluter and make him stop.
I first started working with Sound River probably from the onset. I had to get up to speed. I had to develop a knowledge base as to what's going on. Oftentimes I would ask somebody a question and say, well, you know what? Have you met Matthew Starr? You know, that type of thing.
I first became involved in the coal ash fight shortly after the Dan River coal ash spill.
We have been storing ash for 9 decades. We operate 33 ash basins. There are 650 ash basins around the U.S.
Tomorrow, a federal grand jury will begin hearing evidence on whether North Carolina regulators looked the other way when toxic coal ash leaked from power plants operated by Duke Energy. And there was a massive leak of it last month in the Dan River.
March 2014, at the time, Duke Energy told us that this pumping was just routine maintenance work.
Well, we were able to catch Duke Energy in one of many lies that they told.
From an airplane, they saw Duke Energy pumping water out of those lagoons and into the canal that feeds into the Cape Fear River, which supplies drinking water for people who live downstream. Those crimes, Duke Energy agreed today to pay $102 million. The judge says this is the largest criminal fine in the history of the state of North Carolina. And the way we got here is that the Riverkeepers were right.
State officials will be testing waters near the H.F. Lee Duke Energy facility tomorrow in Goldsboro after concerns coal ash leaked into the Neuse River following Hurricane Matthew.
Duke Energy said nothing happened, everything was good. The Riverkeepers had a helicopter in the air.
Duke Energy does say at least a pickup truck worth of coal ash was found.
More than 1 million tons of coal ash is sitting between 4 and 10 feet thick right below the ground surface.
It's a big pickup truck.
Duke Energy said a dam containing a large lake at a Wilmington power plant has been breached by floodwaters from Florence, and it's possible coal ash from an adjacent dump is flowing now into the Cape Fear River.
H.F. Lee, which is near Goldsboro, there's 3 inactive ponds. I was talking to Matthew Starr, he's the Neuse Riverkeeper. He said the Neuse is so high that he just paddled right over him, and he can see coal ash in the water.
We are a science-first organization. We had to get the science to prove that the coal ash was polluting our river.
Every time that we had a hearing we could depend on Waterkeepers to come with volumes of empirical information.
So the good news, and there is good news.
Landmark settlement today. Duke Energy agrees to close all of its coal ash basins in North Carolina and what's being dubbed the nation's largest coal ash cleanup. The company has been under intense scrutiny after coal ash spilled into the Dan River back in 2014.
They are the ones that have left this toxic legacy across North Carolina. There is still a lot of work to be done, and Duke Energy is still responsible for the pollution that it has created and that it continues to create.
Most folks remember Hurricane Floyd. This was a catastrophic event that's basically isolated eastern North Carolina from the uplands and the Piedmont.
The Category 2 storm created catastrophic storm surge. Some areas even saw as much as 15 feet. Look at that, homes underwater. Parts of the coastal plain picked up almost 1.5 feet of rain.
Princeville always been low-lying marshy land, but over the course of development, Princeville the Saucer became Princeville the Cup.
1999, Hurricane Floyd, floodwater was up over top of this bridge. The town of Princeville, which is on the other side of this river, took a big hit.
What I did, I drove into this community, I didn't live here then, and I said, if you have a pillow and a blanket, take it to Tarboro High.
If you look at the record over the last 150 years, for example, we can see that these storms actually are more intense, and most importantly, they're bringing more rainfall. 6 out of 7 of the wettest storm events that we've had have all occurred in the last 20 years. We know that it takes a while for these systems to recover. So if we're getting more frequent storm events that are impacting the system is still recovering from a previous event when it gets hit by the next event. It's sort of like taking a patient, that isn't quite well yet, and then there's another bug that comes along and gives them pneumonia.
I think when people think about climate change, we think about hurricanes, which are for sure present here. We know that climate change is fueling these rain events that are happening more frequently, and they're heavy rain events where 3 or 4 inches of rain is dumped all at once, and our stormwater infrastructure is not set up to move water out fast enough. So when we talk about climate change, it's not just a water quantity issue, but it's also this public health issue where now your waters have these levels of bacteria or contamination that are harmful to people.
We can greatly reduce that impact, but we have to recognize how climate change is affecting clean water, because it will continue to make the problems that seem small today much larger in the future.
We know that polluted water doesn't impact everybody equitably. There are certain areas where water quality is better because of the way that community looks, how much money, how much power they have.
Big business just have the attitude that they can do anything and not think twice.
You have to make a decision and move somewhere else. Most people don't have that financial ability.
I used to have the naive impression when I first started out doing this that we elected politicians to represent us. I'm very comfortable saying that they don't represent us. Big corporations and their dark money is what's running our country. It's all about extraction, and we will address the lives lost, the land lost, later maybe, but just keep the money coming.
We're gonna get to the point where we've done so much damage that it can't be reversed.
There is a point of no return, and I don't know that we ever know when we're going to get there.
And if we do not continue that push towards cleaner water, our communities will suffer. Not just the environment. It's not just an environmental problem. It's a community problem.
We're so focused on the economy and our waters are completely polluted. It's not gonna matter. Like, our economy is not gonna matter.
Advocating for fishable, swimmable, drinkable water is what Sound Rivers has done, is what we'll continue to do into the future, and having that support by the community is key to our success.
The young people are getting it. Don't know where they're getting it from, but they're getting it.
I really think that the younger generation is getting smarter than we were at their age. I believe they're more conscious about their environment and what surrounds them. And that gives me hope. You know, it's going to be a heck of a fight.
Okay. I think I could use a little help with the lights if someone is able to do that. Turn the lights on. There's something on the wall. That'd be great. There's never just a light switch. Awesome. That works. Is that bright enough for you all? Can you see okay? Okay. I think I'm pretty loud, so I might just walk around. Are y'all able to hear me? Do you keep on time? Oh, okay. Well, I'll just stay right here then for everyone online. Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I think that video did as good a job introducing the role of Riverkeepers as I could do, but I'll do my best to share a little bit more about what it is that I do, and specifically the work that I do on the Neuse River, which is, of course, our local waterway. So again, my name's Samantha Krop. I've been in the role of your Neuse Riverkeeper for about 3 years now. So I maintain the right to say I don't know to a lot of things for at least another 3 more years. But I'm really grateful to be here. I live in Raleigh. I'm originally from Florida. Like Missy said in the introduction, I grew up as a swamp creature. I did a 10-year stint out in Oregon in the Pacific Northwest, working in forestry in public lands. And then I also did high school and college level education. So really my lens in the environmental work that I do is really looking at things through a lens of education and community advocacy, and kind of hands-on place-based conservation work. I'm really interested in place-based work. So I like to say that as your Riverkeeper, I work both for the river, but I also work for all of you who rely on the river, because all of us do. So I think, as I said, that documentary sort of introduced the background of what us Riverkeepers do. And I'm so proud to be part of an international network of waterkeepers. So we're not just here, we're not just in North Carolina or just in the United States, we're international. And we work on not just rivers, but bays, waterways all over the world. And here in North Carolina, we actually have the most waterkeepers of any state in the country. So we do a really good job looking after our waterways here. But not every river has a keeper, and we have, as I'll discuss in this presentation, our hands pretty full with all kinds of issues. So that video gave a kind of a smattering of some of the history of issues that we've seen on the Neuse River. I'm going to talk about today is what I'm looking at today in the past 3 years of my work, kind of the focus issues that I've really been dealing with. And I'll talk about some depressing stuff, and then I'll also talk about some ways to get involved with some hopeful things. And I'll leave some room for questions at the end.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Could you switch over to be in front of the camera, the online folks?
Yes. How does this work? Okay. Am I in front of the camera now? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, I can see myself. Okay. Well, that'll work. So many moving parts. Thank you for the correction. So the previous Riverkeepers, we used to have an upper and a lower Neuse Riverkeeper, and now we have one Riverkeeper on the Neuse River. And so I work, as I said, based here in Raleigh, but I work out of our New Bern office quite a lot. We've got an office in New Bern, and we also have an office in Little Washington on the Tar River. So I split my time. Tomorrow I'm headed down to Kinston. I spent a lot of time in Goldsboro working with some of the folks who were in that film, and time down in New Bern as well. So covering that whole range. And as Katie, a previous Riverkeeper, mentioned, the role of the Riverkeeper is really split between being a scientist, an educator, an investigator, and an advocate. So people like to ask me what my days look like, and I always have to answer, it's very different every day. There is no normal day for a Riverkeeper. Every day is a very different day. But I will do my best to try and share sort of what some of those different kinds of days look like. So I mentioned that, we do a lot of investigation. We run a hotline. So just like, any hotline network, anyone can call in a concern, a pollution issue, something that they see on the water. So some days we'll get calls that there's been illegal dumping next door, and other days someone will call about a coal mine, or sorry, we don't have coal out here, about a sand mine that's proposed, or a mineral mine that's proposed out here that they're concerned about. And other days it will be a sewage spill. And so we will get those calls and we will go out and we'll investigate. And sometimes that investigation looks like going out and walking on, on the ground, going out to the water, taking water quality samples, like this photo on the right demonstrates, grabbing some water quality samples. And sometimes that investigation looks like going up in the air on those little planes that were in the film. And we'll do aerial monitoring of things that are just really hard to access from the ground. So we get a lot of good intel from the sky. And other days, we will do that investigation by digging into government archives and records and filing public records requests and getting all the information that we don't have at our fingertips and trying to make sense and piece together stories of what's happening on the ground. So those are all kinds of ways that we investigate. And as I mentioned, I work not just on the Neuse River, but I work in the whole Neuse watershed. So I think probably for everyone here, the term of a watershed is familiar, but just as a refresher, the way I like to think about it is it's the shape, the bowl in which if there's a drop of water from the sky that lands anywhere in that shape, it's eventually somehow, some way going to end up in the Neuse River, either by rolling off impervious surfaces and flowing into the river, or by getting into one of the many tributaries of the Neuse, like Crabtree Creek, like Swift Creek, Middle Creek, Bryce's Creek, any of those ways it can eventually get into the Neuse. So I work in that whole watershed. It's about 6,235 square miles wide. And it starts up at the tippy corner of Orange and Person counties and ends up down at the Pamlico Sound, which is our state's second largest, biggest fishery. It's really important, of course, to our commercial fishing communities, our recreational fishing communities, the Pamlico Sound. And another fun fact about the Neuse River itself is that it's the longest river contained in our state that doesn't have a dam. It's completely undammed except for Falls Lake Dam. And of course, Falls Lake itself provides drinking water for 500,000 people, including most of Wake County. So that's our major drinking water on the Neuse. But people do drink the water of the Neuse River all the way down, I believe, to Kinston. So it's a major drinking water source as well. Really special river. And I love to do a little kind of just orientation to the river before I talk about some of the issues that I deal with in my day-to-day. I actually, when I first got the job back in March of 2022, they said, hey, do you want to paddle the whole river? And I thought that was the wildest thing that I've ever been asked to do for a job. And obviously I said I wanted to do that. I did not paddle the whole 275-mile long river, but I did paddle 150 miles of it in 11 straight days with some friends and two dogs and two friends. And it was spectacular. So my one major message for everyone here today is if you are interested in exploring the Neuse River, please do. There's so much to see and you can have the adventure of your lifetime. But also it really, the river itself changes drastically along its course. I mentioned that it starts at Falls Lake, which is our drinking water supply. It's local here in Raleigh. But you know, quickly it changes. This is our one whitewater feature on the whole Neuse River. Right here, we got that in Raleigh, Falls of the Neuse. If you ever go down to that area, you'll see just a little whitewater. But the rest of the river is pretty lazy and slow. Another really cool feature, if you get down to the Goldsboro area, down to the little town of Seven Springs, Cliffs of the Neuse State Park, really incredible geological feature. You can actually see the different layers of geological history on that cliffside, which is just right there in what's otherwise pretty low-lying swampland. And then as you get down to Kinston in the real swamp and the real bottomland hardwood forest type land, you get the river being really wide, you get your big old cypress trees, and it just gets that gorgeous look that you see there. And then when you get to New Bern, you get salty, you get your saltwater creatures coming in, you've got your marshes, your estuary systems and bigger water. And your Croatan National Forest, can't forget that. That's such a good feature. And then when you get to Oriental, it basically looks like an ocean, looks like you're on the mouth of an ocean. So at that point, if you're standing on the Neuse River and you're looking across, the mouth is 6 miles wide, which is the widest mouth of any river in the country. It's another fun fact for you. So this river is dynamic. And it is so special and yeah, just a really valuable resource for our communities. And as the movie pointed out, the river has a storied history. So Rick Dove was featured, the Neuse River's first Riverkeeper, talking about the history of fish kills in the Neuse River. How many of you were here in the community in the Neuse Basin in the 90s? So you all remember? I think probably we're familiar with the footage that was being shown of the massive historical die-off. So that's the history of the Neuse. We've come a long way since then. In fact, so long, such a long way that the Neuse River was actually awarded River of the Year in 2022. I will say that's not because the river has no problems anymore. That's because we've come a long way. We've come a very long way, but there's much work to be done still, which is some of the stuff I'm going to share next. So ongoing Neuse issues. These are the things that I get calls about that keep me busy every day. Algal blooms and fish kills. While we aren't in the 90s anymore, this is a serious ongoing issue and a product of too much nutrients, too much nitrogen and phosphorus in our waterways. That leads to algal blooms. And when algae dies, which it eventually does because everything living dies, it eats the oxygen in the water and that kills the fish. So it's a direct relationship between nutrient pollution and dead fish. And we see that in the lower watershed a lot, but also on Falls Lake. People are familiar with that. We deal with bacteria. There are many sources of bacteria. The movie talked about factory farms as a common one. In just the 3 years I've been here, I've seen several factory farm spills that I've had to follow up on, unfortunately. But also in urbanized areas, bacteria pollution can come from outdated sewer infrastructure and can come from just really too much rain and bacteria flowing off of our impervious surfaces and into waterways. We deal with litter. This is the visible stuff. Everyone's familiar with this. I will talk about some of the ways we deal with all of these things, but this is a common issue. And of course, plastics breaking up into microplastics is something we study and how that transports into the bodies of fish and bioaccumulates into birds and our bodies too. We deal with construction sediment pollution. I will talk some about a case study of mine. I spend, I'd say, at least a quarter, if not half of my time dealing with construction sediment violations, especially here in the Triangle. This is my bread and butter. Dirt running off of construction sites and polluting creeks. And it fills wetlands. This is a picture I took from the sky, a couple pictures where you can see dirt from a construction site getting into a wetland. This is in Durham. And that's problematic, not just because it looks bad, but because dirt degrades aquatic habitat. It smothers those aquatic insects that fish and also birds need in order to survive. It also increases water temperature. It blocks sunlight for that subaquatic vegetation, for plants, and it can co-occur with elevated levels of bacteria, of nutrients, and of other things like heavy metals. So it's not just like a God-made dirt don't hurt situation. Dirt running off of construction sites is definitely a pollution source for our waterways. And there's a couple more issues before I talk about some of the things, the ways that we deal with them. But this is a huge one, especially for folks who, like you all, so appreciate habitat, is the loss of wetlands and green space. Show of hands, who's familiar with the Supreme Court decision, the Sackett Supreme Court decision that forever changed wetlands federally. Essentially, that happened, was that last year now? It happened. The decision happened last year and forever changed the state of wetland protections in our nation. And unfortunately, our state decision makers followed suit. And so what we're looking at is loss of protection for wetlands, which is habitat and which is also our best tool for protecting ourselves from flood impacts, from these impacts. So this is another thing that the video discussed is, climate impacts. There's a couple of photos here from the city of Kinston. I'm going there tomorrow. That city is an example of one place that was, a huge community that lived along the river was flooded out in Hurricane Floyd. But the Neuse River is facing a future of, flood conditions because of climate change. And so, as was mentioned in the film, this is not just about flood safety, but more flooding. All of the issues that I mentioned before are increased too. More bacteria, more nutrient pollution, more litter. And if you get rid of your wetlands, you're going to have more flood issues too. So it's all connected in that way. So Sound Rivers is working really hard to advocate for smart land use changes. Essentially, what we're working on is connecting with local decision makers and local communities to say, let's do better to protect our wild spaces and protect habitat so that we can address all of these issues. So our kind of key things that we're working on in Durham and Raleigh and other places that we work are advocating for restoring wetlands. That's kind of an obvious, but we, as I mentioned, need wetlands. They support healthy fisheries, they clean our drinking water, they hold back water from flowing downstream, they're natural sponges. And so we recognize that wetlands are the best tools that we have for mitigating climate change. And so we advocate for the protection of these places. We also, against that Supreme Court decision I mentioned, are concerned about this reality. This is just a map showing the wetland loss that's projected and essentially showing that, and especially the coastal communities, we're looking at, over 70% possibility of wetland loss because of that change in rules. So that's a major concern. We're also advocating for just generally keeping more trees on the landscape. So this is kind of an obvious one, but in many of our communities, our development practices look like clearing and grading upwards of 20, 30, 40, 50 acres at a time. That creates the sediment pollution issues that I talked about. It also creates loss of habitat and flooding impacts. So we argue for keeping more trees on the ground as much as possible, minimizing how much you're clearing at a time, and protecting habitat connectivity, which again is really critical for habitat, for creatures and for endangered species that don't get enough protection. And this is another photo that I took in Durham, unfortunately, just some development practices, but this is, far too common is the cutting into buffers along waterways, which again creates all the problems that I just talked about. But we advocate for larger riparian buffers, at least 100 feet around waterways. And we want to see that on every single development that, is out there. Every single land clearing project should be protecting waterways with at least 100 feet buffer. Right now, we only are required to do 50 feet in the Neuse Basin, which is better than most other places, but it's still insufficient. And in this case, they did not leave that buffer at all. So that's what that looks like. And I wanted to hammer home that, all of these poor land use changes that don't adhere to the recommendations, we just talked about, end up contributing to downstream pollution. So this is a photo that I took of sediment from that area in Durham flowing into our drinking water supply. And so this is something that I spend a lot of my time looking at is impacts from land use changes on our drinking water. So the consequences are high. And the reason is, the issue is ongoing. So these are just some photos of satellite imagery of one part. And I know that this is the Wake County Triangle, but these are patterns that I see in Raleigh. These are patterns that I see in Wake County. These just so happen to be photos from Durham, but these are, the image on the left just shows you the context of each one of those is another rezoning, another development that will be cleared or is being cleared. And on the right, you can see how, that is kind of etching away at the landscape. And so this, I would argue is one of our greatest our water quality challenges right now is land use and the stress from, feeling the need to grow and, needing our communities to grow, which we want, but also doing that in a responsible way, a way where we can protect our waterways. And, this is just another example, signs of sprawl. So growing outside of where we're supposed to grow, growing into the urban growth boundary, growing into the protected drinking water supply, annexing property outside of the city, and essentially extending sprawl and cutting into places that we previously saw as protected that are serving important water quality services. And we're also seeing this impacting natural heritage areas. One of the reasons why I connected with Audubon in the first place was because I heard about some potential developments that were planned for natural heritage sites that were on the Natural Heritage Registry. Places like the Middle Lick Creek Bottomlands, which is that pink shape, and the development in question, which is that other shape, just essentially cutting into these few remaining mapped natural areas. This is a big concern for us in our work. And so I wanted to flag one action alert. This is actually tonight, but this is a future action as well. Some of the photos that I showed here, this development is just one example of one thing that's coming down the pike that we are concerned about. This is a development that essentially is challenging natural heritage area, the drinking water supply, and that we think is just one illustrative example of kind of a greater trend that we're hoping to engage with. So here in Raleigh, we're seeing the same kind of trends. And one of the big asks for volunteers right now from an advocacy perspective is we want to work together with folks who have smart things to say about what good development looks like, about what smart land use changes look like, about why we should protect our wetlands and our natural heritage areas and our riparian corridors. And so folks who know about birds are some of the smartest people to talk about the importance of those things. And so I would love to work together with folks on how to engage with our city council, our planning commission on ways to make smart decisions in this regard. And the last few things I want to highlight are just other ways to get involved, some of which you all are already planning to do. This is one way, and maybe some of you here have already gotten involved in our swim guide program. This is a bacteria sampling program that we run every summer in all the places that people like to swim and paddle and recreate. We sample the water with the help of volunteers every single week, and we give that information to the public every single week, and we let them know for free, where is it safe to swim? Where is the bacteria levels too high? So this is for specifically E. coli, which, as I mentioned before, is unfortunately common in surface waters. And so we sample 53 locations throughout the Neuse and Tarpam every single week in the summer. It's free for you to get that info. And here are the Raleigh sample sites. We, I think, are adding in a couple more in the coming year, hopefully on the Neuse River. But these are sample sites that we take down all the way through the Neuse in Raleigh, and we sampled through Clayton, Smithfield, Goldsboro, Kinston, and New Bern. So if you're interested, you can check that out. We also, this is the last thing I'll highlight, is we have, we try to address the problem of litter in our rivers in a smart way. And so you can do the Sisyphus thing, rolling the boulder up the hill forever with trash, but you could also try and do, strategic interception avenues. And so what we do is we work on intercepting trash in its passive flow downstream by putting in these trash traps, which float actually on the river with those booms. And as trash flows downstream, we passively collect it. And then about every month we go in there with a group of volunteers and we clean it out. And for the first year we did this, we actually accounted for everything in the traps. We went through and counted what every single type of thing was. Now we weigh it, so we won't make you count out all the different kinds of trash. But it was very interesting and instructive. And if you ever want to know the strangest things we found or what kinds of things end up in our streams, I would love to talk to you about that. But I think it's a good it's a good lesson in stormwater and really how does this trash end up in our streams. So we have those now. We actually have 3 of them in Raleigh. Raleigh loved them so much they wanted more, but we have them all over the Neuse entire basin. You all are adopting one in the month of May. This is the one you're adopting. This is in Little Rock Creek behind the Walnut Creek Wetland Center. It's a truly just delightful place. And that's what you'll do. You'll clean it out and you'll make it go from the left picture to the right-hand picture. And probably a lot of people who are standing on the bridge where that photo was taken will pass by and notice you and thank you as you're doing it. And then the Neighborhood Ecology Corps, who's the local student group who uses the river, will notice that and thank you. And you'll just be part of a community of folks who've been a part of helping clean this out for the past couple of years. So thank you for that. This is a photo of our trash trap in Kinston. We did a ribbon cutting ceremony and the mayor and city council came. And so just on that note, you know, what I really want to hammer home amidst all of the kind of somewhat depressing water quality issues that I talked about is that I really find a lot of, you know, despite the fact that I work in a pretty dark, you know, arena sometimes, I find a lot of hope and a lot of motivation in this sort of thing. People getting together in the creek, getting on waders, doing good watershed works, or as my bubby would say, good watershed mitzvahs to, you know, just bring people together. And so I hope that whether it's getting in the trash trap with us or helping us collect water samples or helping us show up at city council and advocate for smart land use changes, that you all get involved somehow in the work that we do. And I'm looking forward to working more with Audubon. So thank you all for having me.
We have questions and then you might have to repeat them for the people on the line.
I'm happy to repeat the questions. Yeah. Oops, what was that?
Okay. That was really awesome. So thank you for sharing that. One of my questions is actually related to kind of as we think about pollution moving down the river, I'm thinking about Clayton. Like they have so much development going on with like the biopharmaceutical industry. Have y'all ever engaged with them to talk about better development practices or way that you could work together to support that kind of like off-stream from it?
Yes, definitely. And that's such a good question. So and every waterkeeper approaches their work with a different strategy. Mine tends to be to work with local decision makers. So I do engage on the state and federal level, but where I spend my advocacy work is really working with local decision makers on local decision making policy. And there's a lot of reasons for that I'm happy to expand on, but I do connect with, you know, essentially all the municipal decision makers that I can in the Neuse Basin. So Clayton council members who are friendly to conservation efforts are some of them. I think, you know, I will say that our work on trying to do local land use advocacy is on two parallel tracks. One is every single municipality has, whether they call it a unified development ordinance or a land use ordinance, it's a set of policies that says what you can and cannot do for growth. Sorry if this is redundant for people, but and that is something that can change. So like in Durham, they're rewriting theirs right now. In Raleigh, we're rewriting our comprehensive plan, which is the vision for the UDO, the development ordinance. So all of those policies, they say what can and cannot happen. And so if we write protections into those policies, then all of a sudden every single thing that develops has to follow those protections. So we would love to write in bigger riparian buffers in our UDO and say, you know what, we require the protection of our streams. We would love to write in wetland protections and, you know, water quality assurances. I have actually, you know, like we put together a gold standard playbook of UDO recommendations that we'd like to see, building off of things like the Green Growth Toolkit that a lot of folks here are probably familiar with. So that's one tract is like, and we talk with our allied representatives at the local level all the time to try and get those things in the UDOs. On the other tract is every single month, each of our municipalities gets rezoning applications. Those are whack-a-mole different proposals. And each of those, our decision makers can ask for more on. They can say, yes, sure, come on through, we want to do this. Or they can say no, or they can say, well, okay, but we want to see protections for our rivers. We want to see protections for habitat. We want to see surveys for endangered species. And so they can ask for those things too. So I think we should be working with local decision makers to pass those permanent long-term systemic protections in policy. And we should also be working on individual projects that come up asking for more, asking for better, which is how I connected with Audubon a while ago, was about kind of dealing with those individual projects. Does that answer? So Clayton specific, nothing on that particular development, but more broadly, we're having those conversations. Yeah.
The Joan asked, do you count the trash in the trap like they do in Durham?
Yeah, so for those who couldn't hear, the question was, do we count the trash in the trap like they do in Durham? I'm assuming she's talking about the Haw River Assembly has the same program and they do traps in Durham. So we did initially do the accounting where we went through and we counted every single type. And now we just weigh it because we got the data we needed from a year on that. And that was a lot of labor. So we just weigh it. Yeah.
So I was briefly involved with the Neuse Riverkeeper about 10 years ago or so when Matthew was Riverkeeper, and you mentioned that the upper and lower Neuse Riverkeepers positions have merged since that was, I think you said 2015. Why was that? And can you talk about that? What prompted that decision and what advantages or disadvantages you have found in looking at rivers whole?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So the question is, when did the Upper Neuse Riverkeeper merge, and the advantages and disadvantages for that? So the Sound Rivers became Sound Rivers in 2015 when the Neuse River Foundation and the Pamlico River Foundation merged. The Upper and Neuse Riverkeeper position became the same position in 2022 when I took on the job. So that was the time that we made that decision. And the reason was we decided to add on another kind of limb to our organization. We added on a water quality specialist who works in all of our watersheds. So instead of just having the Riverkeepers, we have now a Riverkeeper team, which includes a water quality specialist, and we're able to bring in interns and have flexibility on specifically the investigation hotline response line. So in some ways it makes it harder because I'm one person driving up and down the Neuse River, but in other ways, our water quality specialist is based in New Bern, so she can dispatch to all the local things there. And then I get to have a bird's eye view of Neuse-wide policy, things that we can replicate, things that we can, we've got our trash traps in Raleigh, we replicate them in New Bern, or we're passing a UDO policy to protect wetlands here. We want to do that in another place too. So I think there are benefits and downfalls, but I think the way that we have our Riverkeeper team structure allows us to have more capacity right now, the way that we have it set up. Yeah.
Mary asked, have you had issues with the General Assembly preventing increased riparian buffers or at the local level?
Yes. So this is the question. This person must be familiar with local policy or be some kind of local elected official, because this is one that I hear all the time. And the question is, this is about state preemption and about our General Assembly. So we are in a Dillon rule state, which is the opposite of a home rule state, which means that technically our localities, our municipalities are only allowed to make rules about things that the General Assembly explicitly says they can make rules about. And so that creates a scenario where a lot of our local decision makers are unsure about, we don't have always clarity around whether or not we have the authority to do certain things, like pass stronger protections for riparian buffers. Some of those things we have clearly no authority to do, and the state has come down and said, no, you cannot. And other things, it's up in the air, and it's a matter of who's going to try it. I will say for the riparian buffer one specifically, there are other municipalities that have passed stronger riparian buffer protections, but typically, including Durham, but typically they attach it to overlays. So we're going to get nerdy, zoning overlays. So instead of saying everywhere has to have bigger buffers, they say in the drinking watershed, or I would argue we should do that in the Triassic Basin, which is the finest, most erosive soils. The reason why I have all those pictures of tomato soup creeks is because of that underlying geology. We should probably pass stronger protections there. That could be a zoning overlay. We could do that. But I think the bottom line is we have to be creative, and we also, I would argue, have to be bold. This is a time where, you know, all the issues I talked about aren't necessarily getting better, and the regulators responsible for dealing with them are getting less funded and less well equipped to respond. And so in the face of that, I would argue that we need to be thinking creatively about ways that we can sort of get around some of these preemption issues, or, you know, boldly take a stance and pick that battle when we're ready to pick that battle, because there are ways to do it, but we have to think creatively about it. Yeah.
We do volunteer stream monitoring for the city of Raleigh, and the stream that we monitor flows directly into the Neuse. I wonder if you can just kind of put that in some context for me. Do you overlap with, coordinate with Raleigh stormwater people doing this stream monitoring with volunteers, and is that a widespread practice in other municipalities too?
Yes, Raleigh stormwater is awesome, and I have the great privilege of working with the stormwater department. I'm on the city's stormwater management advisory commission, and so I get to be a part of the stormwater conversations. And they do a volunteer monitoring program where I'm assuming you're collecting grab samples and then ambient observation. Are you doing physical and chemical samples? Oh, okay, so you're doing like pH and things like that. Very cool. Yes. So the city of Raleigh does a great job with its monitoring of different waterways throughout the city, and they put out sort of watershed reports that reflect the status of the health of those watersheds. Durham also does that. They have stream reports. So what we try to do is fill gaps. So we're certainly not trying to replicate that information. What we typically do, because we don't have the capacity to just monitor everywhere all the time, is we look for problems or we respond to problems. So when we get a call, or when we know that there's a discharger, we know that there's a problem location, we'll focus our sampling efforts there. So when I do turbidity sampling around construction sites, I'm looking at streams that flow in and around construction sites to try and identify problems, rather than our team sampling every single stream in the whole watershed, because the cities are doing a baseline job of that, but they're not always able to respond to those acute issues in the same way. So we try to do gap filling, and I think, like my friend Jill in the movie said, you know, if all of our regulators were adequately funded, Riverkeepers wouldn't have a job. And so we really are just trying to fill gaps, and unfortunately those gaps are getting bigger right now, and so we're filling more of them. Yeah.
I'm wondering how you can coordinate with the city of Raleigh, Durham, other organizations that are also monitoring and concerned about the water quality, how that could be relayed better to our state, to our population. I pay attention to the coastal federations things and other things, but it's kind of piecemeal. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, I think the comment about the fact that there's all these other organizations that are doing monitoring, but there's no kind of hub of all of the information for everywhere is a problem. You know, we all have our different sites. The Waterkeepers do swim guide. You can find your bacteria weekly sampling. No one else is doing that. But if you want to find your coastal waterways, then you can go to Department of Water Resources, and they do the coastal beaches. But if you want to find your nutrient data, you need to go to the cities. And so I'm just agreeing with you that there is not a hub for this information, unfortunately, and there should be. But I can offer, if you are interested in getting water quality data, I'm happy to help point you in the right direction. And there are a lot of gaps out there, like there just aren't, there are places that we just don't have it. But if you're looking for kind of basic things like stream flow and height, water height, and some ambient parameters, the USGS gauges are a really good place to check as well. But I'm happy to provide resources. I saw another hand over here. I thought up here, yeah, Rick.
Yeah. You mentioned state regulators and their diminishing number, I guess, with your plan. Who are the state regulators and what relationship do you have to them? Is that part of the Department of Environmental Quality?
Exactly. So who are the state regulators and what relationship do we have with them? Yeah, so here in North Carolina, so we work with federal, state, and local regulators. And, you know, our federal regulators, we work with probably the least because here in North Carolina, most of our environmental regulation has been delegated to our state authority, which is the Department of Environmental Quality. So the EPA oversees, they're the bosses of the DEQ. So when we need to elevate something, we'll bring it to the EPA. Federally. But here in North Carolina, DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, regulate all things to do with environment. Underneath that umbrella, there is the Department of Water Resources, who I deal with the most. They do everything, you know, inland water quality. There's the Department of Coastal Management, who are coastal water quality, the Department of Waste Management, which is all landfills, septic spray, stuff like that. And the Department of Energy and Mineral Land Resources, DEMLR, and they deal with mining and they also deal with construction sites. So I talk to them a lot. And so our relationship with those entities, and then of course, outside of DEQ, there's the Wildlife Resources Commission, and that's a state commission. And they deal with our state listed endangered and species of concern. And so our relationship is, as gap fillers, we essentially will go out often and do the initial round of investigation and sampling and water quality data collection. We'll talk to community, we'll call people, we'll get the initial amount of information, and we'll turn that over to regulators in a report. And then they'll go out and do the don't do that to the polluters. Because I don't have any authority to tell polluters to stop polluting. I just, you know, unfortunately, because of the lack of funding and resources for those regulators, will often, if you call them and say, hey, there's an oil spill at the Oriental Harbor, they'll say, oh, sorry, we don't really have any time or capacity to get out there. And so, or, you know, oh, we've got, you know, a spill. Unfortunately, a lot of times there's no one who can go look at it. And so we'll go look at it and we'll build the case and we'll hand that over to regulators and we'll say, okay, please now go make the polluters stop polluting, go find them or go whatever. And so we often have a very collaborative relationship with our state regulators. And then sometimes that relationship looks like us holding their feet to the fire when they're not doing the thing that we want them to do and saying, well, you need to do your job. And so it's a little bit of both.
In thinking about big scale stuff that you guys focus on a lot, but also there's a lot of small scale stuff, like in my neighborhood, and I'm thinking personally, there's a runoff stream that rolls through my backyard, and one through the front yard as well. If we're not careful, we end up as an island. I don't know what we can and can't do back there. And we've been told we can't do anything as far as like trying to clear fallen trees to let the water flow better. How do we find out what we can and can't do with those runoff streams that roll through our yard into tributaries and then on?
Yeah, so this is for the people on Zoom, this is a question about what we're able to do as private landowners with stormwater runoff issues in our yard and what kind of authority do we have to address them. So I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one because I think there's a lot of like site-specific things that go into my answer. But if you're in the city of Raleigh, the Raleigh Stormwater Department deal with stormwater runoff. And so we did actually pass some new rules recently that if it's runoff coming from city or public land, then the city needs to deal with that. If it's runoff coming from a private entity near you, it gets a little more complicated. But the first ones I would suggest, if you've got a stormwater runoff problem, the city of Raleigh is the city. most of our cities have a stormwater department. If not, it's often a county delegated department, so you can go to Wake County. But I'm happy to talk to you about your particular issue if you want to after this. Cool. Yes. I briefly mentioned it, but we should reiterate. So what's the date for that again? April 22nd. Okay, sorry, we're in the month of February now. What year is it? February 22nd, Sound River's volunteer coordinator, Emily Fritz, is going to be leading a field trip to that trash trap that I shared in Little Rock Creek. And y'all are going to get a chance to get in the creek and waders and help with clean out. And then in the month of May, you all are adopting it, which means that it's up to you to care for it without any instruction or support from us. Just kidding, we'll help. But we're really excited. And like I did mention, we have had that trap. That was one of our flagship traps. It was our flagship for the city of Raleigh, and we've had upwards of 100 people help us clean it out at this point, including youth, folks of all ages from all parts of the city. And it's just been a really beautiful kind of labor of love. So we appreciate you all being a part of that. Awesome.
There's nothing else. Do you have anything else, David?
I think I'm good.
Oh, we have some cookies. We have some cookies.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody online. On our speakers next month, they will be speaking from out of town. So we will project their PowerPoints here on the projector. So we'll still come here, but they'll be zooming in. They are recipients of some awards we've made through the Field Inclusive program. So Wake Audubon has been sponsoring a couple of students to get small grant awards to do their bird research, mostly bird, it might be something else, through Field Inclusive. And so they're going to present next month. So hopefully we'll either see you here or online at that one. And I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you all. Right now, do we have to clean up the chairs tonight, John?